Welcome to the Your Gifts Matter podcast. This podcast is all about guiding, educating, and inspiring individuals around the world to access their true gifts, talents, and abilities. We believe that everybody has a gift to offer to the world, and sometimes you may need help, inspiration, and motivation to bring it to life. And that's what this podcast is all about. Our guests are here to share their story, their journey on how they brought their own gifts to the world and show you how you can do the same for yourself. Hey everyone, welcome again to another episode of the Your Gifts Matter podcast. Excited to have Kevin McNee here. He's a men's connection coach, and he's the founder of the Ripple Effect Men's Movement. And, gonna love diving into that, but, looking forward to just kind of get to know you first, Kevin, and excited to have you here. Thanks so much for being here.
Well, thanks for having me. It's always exciting to be able to contribute and, being invited to be a guest on these. So thank you.
Yeah. Oh, it's great to have you. We've been
Mhm.
we've been connecting over the last few months more and more, and getting to know each other and really enjoyed hearing more about your story and your journey, and would love to just have you share, maybe just kind of starting, where you came from, and perhaps like what was growing up like for you.
Mhm.
We'll start there and
Yeah.
go from there.
Yeah. I mean, on the outside looking in, I had a blessed childhood. You know, I never had to worry about, a roof over my head or food on the table. I always, it was pretty blessed that way. I'd write a letter to Santa Claus, and what I asked for, I got. Like it was, when I look back on that for the better part of my life, I was like, I really had nothing to complain about. Yet there was still stuff that I was feeling, like some resentment or some frustration or fear or insecurities, and not really knowing and understanding what those came from. So, it was one of those things too, as looking back on my childhood and having every so much to be grateful for and to be thankful for. And like my parents stayed together and they were very hardworking and they did everything that they could to like give us everything, my sister and I. Um, I was like, it's not fair for me to complain.
Mm.
Like there's no way that I should complain or bitch and moan about anything that I'm feeling internally when there's so many other people that are struggling and really don't have anything like I had. So their life is way worse than mine. So I'm just gonna like bury what I have and continue to just try and like show up and get my needs met, my wants and needs through, being successful or, being good at sports or, the outside validation and acceptance and love in the ways that I knew how to feel it, even though there was a lot of times throughout my life where I struggled with that. Why do I feel this way? Or why am I afraid to speak my truth? Or why am I afraid to stand up for myself? Or, why do I lie when I'm confronted? The things like that. So
Yeah.
that's pretty broad, but that's a little bit about me growing up.
So where did that lead you with deciding to kind of push back answering those questions, of those why questions? Where did that lead you to in deciding to kind of push that down? What resulted from doing that?
Mm, well, I became a nice guy.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, you and I have discussed the nice guy syndrome, and anyone
Mhm.
who's listening, nice guy syndrome is a thing, and it's like,
Mhm.
everyone my entire life was like, "Oh, Kevin, he's so nice. You're such a nice guy. Like,
Mhm.
you know, the way that you show up and how you treat people." And I love that. Like, I loved hearing that I was a nice guy. So I made that my MO to show up and be nice and be loved and be liked by everyone, no matter what it was doing, whether it was in sports, my teachers, in my relationships, in my jobs. So I just literally poured myself into everyone and everything else outside of me to receive that validation. And if I didn't get it, it was like, oh, there's something wrong with me. And that just confirmed how I felt inside. So it wasn't until all of these relationships, all of these different jobs and careers and just different experiences throughout my life that led me to my marriage and then my divorce breaking down and me seeking outside validation and going outside of my marriage, and also feeling like, man, I'm a good guy. I'm a nice guy. I'm a good man. I'm a good husband. I'm a good father. I literally do everything for everyone else, but I'm still not getting what I need, and I'm not feeling that love, that connection, that inner meaning and purpose. And it was the breakdown of everything. So when the reason that I started asking those questions of why is because, it led to my life just imploding from the inside out, my marriage breaking down, divorce, separation and divorce, toxicity in the court system and navigating all of that,
Right.
and really just deep diving into myself, going like, why am I doing these things? Why am I acting this way? Why do I show up this way when I'm confronted? Why do I lie when I'm afraid? All of these questions, and because I didn't want to do that anymore. I was just tired of my own shit.
Yeah. Oh, how old were you when this awareness kind of came full
It
on?
started in my, like mid 30s.
Okay. Yeah.
I think I was about 33. It was the first time I went to like an energy healer and started kind of like opening my eyes to something more, right? And I mean, I still drank too much, and I still hid the fact that I was smoking cigarettes, and like doing these things under the surface that were out of integrity, and also like putting myself in situations that were not okay. They weren't agreed upon in my marriage, and that was out of integrity,
Mhm.
right? But it was those like, and then I'd wake up in the morning like, after a night out, or after going out with some friends, or going to like a golf tournament with my buddies, and waking up with like this like painful anxiety, going like, what did I do? How did I do this? Why did I put myself in that? I need to do everything that I can to make up for it. So I would just like pour myself into being like the best dad, the best husband, the best leader at work. And, I was successful in all of those ways on the outside, but on the inside, I was battling all this stuff and not understanding why. But it was, that was about my mid 30s. And then it finally hit home as I came into 40, going, you know, um, I'm just not okay living like this. And I was willing to do whatever it took to get out of it, even if it was the breakdown of everything that I knew to be true at that time.
And was it the breakdown that really was the wake up for you that you needed to, yeah.
Absolutely. Because as much as it was like, I cheated on my wife and I met someone else, and I left, I left my marriage, and on the outside it looked like I was just like abandoning my family and going into this other relationship, and the younger woman analogy and whatever. But really all I was trying to do was to figure out a way of, one, finding out why I was the way that I was, figuring out what it is that I actually wanted, and truly choosing me for the very first time, what felt like in my entire life. So on the outside, it looked like maybe I was just like this cheating piece of shit, or whatever. And I mean, I've been called that, but in my own heart, in my own mind, I was literally just doing everything that I knew how to do to try and rectify a situation. And I was willing to like go through the deepest, darkest depths to dig, find the answer, and come out the other side. Hopefully, that was my hope, but I didn't even really know what I was doing at the time. It was just like it was organized and disorganized chaos.
This sort of is, yeah. Like I see, like it was this this facade that you had created about, keeping that nice guy image, but at the same
Mhm.
time, uh, partaking in these behaviors that are, in some ways like wanting to counteract that and prove that it was almost like a way to prove that you're not as nice as everybody thinks.
Yeah, and I mean,
Yeah.
this is something, I was actually thinking about this right before we got on the
Yeah.
podcast. It's doing this type of work, creating an online presence is so much different than when I worked in oil and gas and business development in that area. So, thinking about like my own experience and sharing that to connect with others, and men that I'm going to be working with, and ones that I'm working with now and that I've worked with.
Mhm.
But I reflected on that too, and it's like those masks of being someone that we're not and showing up in a certain way where like everything looks all great on the outside, and then I get home and it's like I can take off my mask, or I can take I can take my Superman outfit off, and then I lay in bed and there's just nothing but shame and guilt and being like, man, like you're such a wuss. Like it's, I don't stand up for myself, or I wish I would have said this, or I should have done that, or man, next time I'm going to do this. And then the next time comes and I don't.
Mhm.
I fall back on it because, I don't feel worthy or strong enough to stand up for me because it's me and what I want, because I've trained myself to give everyone else what they want and be that provider that so many of us have men been taught and conditioned to believe that we need to be. So I give myself away in the process to receive whatever it is that I thought that I wanted. And when I got it, it was like, oh, that didn't fill this hole either. So
Yeah.
now what do I do?
Yeah, yeah. And did you find that in the workplace and that you were around other guys that were doing the same thing, and it was kind of um, validating that it's okay to behave this way, or were you on this journey, like this struggle, just all on your own?
It was I mean the perceived image from everyone was this is the right way to do it,
Yeah,
right? Even, from my parents, from my dad, it was like you worked hard. That was what you did as a man. You got to work, right? And when you work, you make money and you provide all the things, the house, the money, the food, the shelter, the hockey gear, the clothing,
mhm,
the best of everything. That's what you do as a man. You
mhm,
just do that, right? Talking about emotions or like connecting and creating intimacy and true love and romance and deep connection. No, that's not what it's all about. Or
yeah,
at least they didn't share anything about that because they didn't know,
yeah,
right? My dad didn't. The people that I learned from didn't, and the people that I was hanging out with didn't. We were all literally going through the same motions and supporting each other through that. And the saying comes up for me often is it's that one where misery loves company,
mhm,
right? So if we're all doing the same thing, it's like, oh, I can relate to that. So I'm just going to make sure that I fit in with that. But oftentimes, misery loves company is taken in kind of a negative connotation.
yeah,
But when we look at it, where if I was to start saying, like, you know what, I'm really struggling with my marriage, or I'm struggling at work, I feel like I'm not good enough, I'm insecure, and like I don't know what to do about it. That would create a deep connection with these other guys if they were allowed to let themselves, feel into that. And that's where, we none of us were open to do that yet. So we were just kind of floating along the surface, and that's where I started to really look at, like, who really knows who I am? Like nobody really knows who I am because I haven't let them in. And do I really know who they are? So are we even friends, or what is a friendship? And like it was those kind of connections, and that's kind of started the way of thinking in that aspect, because I was starting to get to be 40 years old, and now it's like, hmm, that went pretty fast.
yeah, right.
So what about the next 40 years? Is this how I'm going to live? And that kind of started a bit of an unraveling and unpeeling that onion.
Yeah, and I see these brick walls behind us in our backgrounds here, and it seems like you had this wall up for many years, and it was time to actually break it down and take a hammer to it and really look at what's behind it. So, what did it take to? And was it the divorce and the and going through that marriage breakup that actually was your wake up call that I need to work on things differently and do things differently and look inside yourself is
Hmm. Like that was when I started asking those questions, like,
yeah.
why am I acting like this? Why am I lying? Why am I afraid to stand up for myself? Right? So, when I started asking those questions, that's when I started to reach out for help.
Mhm.
The hardest part in that reaching out for help was like, where do I go? Right? Who do I talk to? Especially like I can talk to a therapist or I can talk to a counselor or a psychologist or whatever. The majority of them are women. The majority of them have not been through what I've been through. The majority of them don't know what it's like growing up as a boy, as a teenage boy, as an adolescent boy into manhood, as a man that struggles with everything that I've struggled with. So,
So who did you turn to then?
well, that was it. I
Yeah.
did talk to a therapist
Yeah.
and it was a man. My brother was talking to someone.
Oh,
So it just happened to be where we connected just, I'm going to say by chance, but I believe in that the universe gives us who we need when we need it. And he showed up and I was actually driving on the highway, on the Alaska highway. And right before I went out of service, he phoned me and I pulled over and, and he said to me, so tell me about you. So I told him about me, my interpretation, right?
mhm.
Tell me about your ex-wife and then tell me about your dad and then tell me about your mom, right? So I told him a bit about my ex-wife or my wife and our relationship and how that worked. And then I told him a little bit about my dad and my experience with him and then my mom and my experience with her. And he's just like, oh, interesting. Sounds like you're like your mom and you married your dad. And I was like, holy shit. There was so many similarities. And I mean, I'm not going to say that she was like exactly like my dad, but just very, the similarities were surprising to me. And it was just like opened my eyes to like, oh man, I'm looking in the wrong direction here. I'm looking out here to try and find the answers when I need to be looking right here in the mirror and looking backwards to see where all of this stemmed from and what I made that mean, right?
Right.
So all of the situations, all of the experiences, we'll call them, the traumas or whatever it was that I faced in my childhood from my parents, from everything that I did, I wasn't looking there. And when I did, I was like, oh, when I get challenged or I get, like I get confronted on something, I get scared, just like I used to when I was a little kid. And it felt like my dad was giving me trouble or my mom was giving me trouble. And I was like, okay, that literally affected me my entire life. And that's how I was showing up. So it was a real eye opener. And that is one of the greatest gifts in the work that I do with men is what are the relationships like with your parents? And let's go back and just look into that. And then we can highlight and see how that's showing up for you in your present day so that it doesn't continue to control you in the future. And it's like, it's mind boggling for these guys to open themselves up to that because a lot of them don't even consider that that's why their relationships are failing or that's why their health is failing or that's why their businesses are struggling or they're so attached to their businesses because they're still trying to please their dad in some way or their finances are in in the tank. So it really does lead into everything.
It's amazing the connections that we look at in the past, right? And how,
Hmm.
especially how, and I've done training on family systems in the past, and
Hmm. Hmm.
and just seeing the patterns that show up when it comes to how did the family handle stress? How did they handle anxiety? How did they handle the loss of a loved one? How did they handle conflict? Like looking at those, even from our parents, but then even their parents' generation, it is, it's the little carrots that are there to help us understand who we are is pretty
Yeah.
amazing. And I know that there's some coaching philosophies that they don't want to go back in the past, but there's, even from like I'd imagine that this is what you're helping men with is that there is like it's not a matter about hanging out in the past for a long period of time, but just looking at and recognizing that there's patterns there, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, if I believe if you're not willing to look into the past, you're avoiding what's really there.
Yeah.
right? And there is looking into the past and they're staying stuck there. And that's where a lot of people are, but they're living their present lives. They're living as though everything is great right now, or not even great, but just like they're just living, but they're living based on the past. So if they don't realize that and everything is happening, they'll say to them, it's actually because they don't know or they haven't acknowledged the past and how that's still affecting them. So unless you're willing to go back and look at that and at least figure out what it is to pinpoint it so that you know whether you heal it or not, or whether you do the inner child work or the family systems work, the parts work, whatever it is to navigate that healing process. At least now you know, so that as you're moving forward, it's like, oh, when I react in this situation, ah, that's where it's from. I recognize this. Oh, when this guy challenges me, or I have to have a hard conversation, or I shut down, or I get triggered and I react a certain way, it's like, oh, it's because I recognize this from when I was a kid. Now you can go, I can either change or I can continue being the same. And it's really up to you which one you choose.
Yeah, choice is presented there. Okay, how do I want to be?
Yeah.
How do I want to move forward?
Totally.
Yeah.
And it's like one of the things that I recognize, do you see the brick wall behind you and the brick wall behind me? As men, we like to smash our heads off of those multiple times until we get the lesson, right? And I am going to put all of us in the same box because, it's one of those things where it's like until we get that lesson or hit the point where we're just tired of beating our heads against the wall, that's when we like surrender and go, okay, I'll create some change. And then it's like the universe goes, okay, here you go. Here's what you wanted. I was just waiting for you to acknowledge that and allow yourself to receive it.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
Such a good way to look at things. A powerful way to look at things. And I can absolutely resonate with the nice guy, and we've talked about it before, but the nice guy
The people pleaser,
mentality,
the nice
people
guy,
pleaser, yeah.
absolutely.
And in relationship, whether at work or in actual intimate relationships, and how it plays out, and like how did you move through that? What you talked to this therapist to start things off. Like, how did that evolve, and how did you start to change these patterns and these I guess
Mm-hmm.
these beliefs around being a nice guy to be able to shift it so it was more about being authentically yourself versus trying to please everybody.
Yeah. Well, what I learned about the nice guy is it's really that it, there's no backbone, right? And it shows up because of there's a variety of different ways, but it could be the mother wound or the father wound. But what for me with the nice guy was I didn't have the courage to stand up for myself. I didn't have the the confidence. I was insecure. I grew up overweight and just wanted to not have that be validated and true that people saw me for that. So I learned to shut myself down. I learned to, just be that nice guy. And without the backbone or the balls to say, I'm not okay with this, or I'm going to stand up for myself. When I realized that was me, really what it was about is looking into where I wasn't standing up for myself, where I wasn't like sharing my full authentic truth. And it was pretty much everywhere in my job with with the owner of my company, in my relationship with my kids, with my family. So when I started to do that, it was a challenge, right? Like, and it was not only a challenge for me, like internally to feel myself going, this is how I'm feeling. This is what I'm going through. This is what I'm going to accept and not accept. And seeing and feeling the reaction from others that I was afraid of my whole life, right? Not being accepted, not being lovable, right? Because what I had done is I had created and taught them that it was okay for them to treat me this way. It was okay that it was okay that I was going to be the one that gave them everything that they needed. And now that I was going to like take my power back and give more to me, and they weren't going to receive so much, that's when it brought up, it brought up those reactions for them. But when I did that, it was teaching them a new way. And the only way that I learned and they learned is by staying consistent with that, even through the hardest times. Even when my heart was beating out of my chest and my palms were sweaty, and I was like, oh my God, like this is the scariest situation I've ever been. But on the other side of that is true freedom. And at least it was for me.
Does he have an example that you're open to sharing of where that happened?
Yeah, like,
Yeah.
I'll use an example of with my ex-wife. We had a really difficult time going through our separation and divorce, and the communication and that just it was really broken. And there was a time where she reached out to me and she was like, I really think that we can get through this, and I want to come back together, and I really want to try and make this work, and I can forgive you for what you did. And I sat with that for a minute and I was like, no matter what happens right now, we need to create this separation. And I was like, and I felt like I was like, oh, this feels like invitation to connect again, right? And even though I felt that, my heart knew that I needed to at least take this separation to figure out what it is that I truly wanted. And I said no. I said that's not what I need right now. So that was like one of my first times that I said no, had that boundary and followed through on it. And it was a complete explosion, right? She was just like, I knew it. I knew this is you and this is what's what. And all, there was a huge reaction. And with that, I was like, mm, that's what I felt was there underneath.
Mm.
But by me standing my own ground and honoring what I needed in that moment, um, it just allowed me to just feel and gain more confidence and trust in myself, as well as trusting my intuition and my gut, because that was something that I went against for so many times in my life.
What did it take for you to stand in that and hold that decision?
It was just a reflection of
Yeah.
who I said I wanted to be,
Yeah.
right? One of my core values has always been integrity, even though I acted out of integrity so many my times in my life. It was something that was a pillar that I always wanted to come back to and I believed in. So with integrity means, what are you doing? Like, are you doing the things that you say that you're going to do? And I hadn't done that for a long time in many ways. So in that moment, I was like, you know what? I'm going to start honoring my own boundaries and saying yes to the things that align with me and no to the things that don't. And this didn't align with me at that time. If we were to like continue to build on our relationship and my new relationship wasn't where I needed to go, obviously there was an opportunity for that. But in that moment, it was a no. And when I said no, it just triggered this reaction. And I was like, okay, my gut knew.
Yeah.
And I stood up for myself and I said no when I meant it. And when it was a full body no. And yeah, that was really it. I got tired of accepting myself going against integrity. And I think that there's so many men out there that aren't honoring what they truly want and desire, and they're allowing themselves to betray themselves by, you know, when those opportunities or those challenges come up, is fall back. And then it's like start the shame spiral or getting back into our head and going like, oh man, you're such a pussy, and why didn't you stand up for yourself, and all the negative talk and all of this stuff and just beating ourselves up. And I'm like, I just got tired of it. And sometimes I feel like men just need to get tired of their own shit like I did before they actually start making changes.
And do you find that it's pretty consistent with the men that you're working with? Is that they've hit this point where everything's fallen apart and they essentially are waking up that they need help. Is that a common thing you're seeing?
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
it's like they're being pushed to the edge of the cliff, and they wait and wait and wait until their toes are at the end, and someone's pushing them forward, and then they're like, okay, 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 I'll do it. Right? Now I'll do it. But I mean, we've been taught and conditioned to to give people what they want. If we give our partners what they want, then we're going to get the love and what we want in return. But doing that in a transactional way like that is like, it's like me just forcing myself on you and wanting it so bad actually makes you want to pull away, right? As opposed to being like, I'm going to feed the relationship and I'm going to give to us as a couple. And I'm making you dinner because I love you, not because I want sex, or not because I want you to cuddle me, or because I need something from you. It's because I just want to do that for you because I love you. And also too is like being able to have our own needs and independence in some ways, and hanging out with other men or our friends or whatever it is, being able to take that space. And a lot of men don't do that. They don't go and have fun, and they don't connect on a deeper level with other men. And what they do is they create this codependency and with their partners, and it's creates this disconnect and this kind of sitting in limbo, right? Where nobody's really attracted to each other. There's not that magnetic frequency that there is in the beginning, where it's like, you know
Yeah.
what? If I don't show up fully, I might lose this person and I don't want to. Well, we need to start creating that more so in our lives, instead of going, well, you know what? We've built a life together now. I signed this paper that said we have to be together, so I don't have to show up fully anymore. It just says that you have to do this, and you're stuck with me,
Yeah.
because it's a recipe for what so many people are feeling. And yeah, it's really sad, and it's hard to watch, and it's hard to
Yeah.
be a part of.
Yeah. No, it is. It's and I've gone through a separation and divorce myself, and so I can
Hmm.
relate to what you're saying. And what I find interesting is you mentioned codependency, because a lot of times codependency is associated with an addiction, like a drug addiction or alcohol addiction, but it doesn't necessarily have to be the case from what you're saying. It could just be that decision in the relationship that you're going to try to fulfill this need all the time versus the needs of yourself.
Hmm. If you, as men who are, or women too, anyone who's listening to this podcast, when you start filling your own needs and you don't need someone else to fill that hole or fill that gap or fill those that bucket of yours, then that creates an energetic frequency. It creates a magnetism that they want to do that for you, right? So that's where it's like, when you think about the magnets, a positive and negative, they're pulling each other along, right? Or I even think of the analogy of an elastic band. When the elastic band, or like a pulley system with a band, when
Mhm.
you bring them close together, the belt sags, the elastic sags. When you pull them apart, it creates tension. So if you start moving away just enough to where it's like you're okay without your partner, it doesn't mean that you don't love them, you don't want them or whatever, but you're just solid without that. Then it creates this energy of like, oh, if he's good enough without me, I better put in the energy to start making sure that he wants me. And that's just a frequency. It's more than just like actually thinking about it, but the more that you start taking care of yourself on both ends, the more that it creates this magnetic tension that is exciting, it's polarizing, it really feeds the relationship. So there's a balance and a dance with that.
Definitely. Yeah. Is that dynamic in the relationships where if one is moving too, like as you talked about, this pursue or distance or kind of dance, right? And
Mhm.
if there isn't a proper separation there or distance, and knowing that everybody can be their own self in the relationship, it can create that weird dynamic that doesn't, it's not healthy. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Is there anything else that you think would be important for any men or women that are listening to this when it comes to um, the work that you do as a men's connection coach?
Mhm. If you haven't looked into what your attachment style is or what attachment styles are, um, I highly recommend checking that out. I've done some work and training with a gentleman named Dewey Freeman. in Colorado, and he's one of the leading experts on attachment theory. He's created the Freeman attachment model, and he says that everything that we go through, all of the struggles, all of the challenges, all the issues, all the fears, insecurities, everything that we're facing as human beings comes from the attachment or the broken attachment from our families, our caregivers, our parents. So there's the three styles of attachment: avoidant, anxious, and anxious avoidant or disorganized. And then there's what he calls healthy attachment. Not many of us have had like a full healthy attachment, but it is there. Most of us operate in one of these other styles. So when we look at the attachment, that's basically based, in short, Reader's Digest version, it comes from the connection or lack of connection that we had with our parents, mothers or fathers or both. And that is where a lot of our stuff comes from, most of it. So how we're operating relationships, how we're operating personally, physically, mentally, in our businesses, financially, all of it. If we're not looking at those attachment styles, if we're not looking at like what our experiences with like with our parents, then we're not looking in the places where we're going to find the answers.
And what have you seen the benefits of the men you've helped that have actually taken the time to look at that? What have they been able to feel or accomplish or be able to have access to?
It's it's everything,
Yeah.
right? I've had couples that have come to work with me, and actually I just got an invite to one of their weddings here coming up this summer, and you just like looking at those relationships and understanding why we are the way we are. And that is the biggest thing, is if you were to ask yourself, why am I the way that I am? If you don't know the answer, that's where it is, right? If you want to know who you want to be, the only access is through the blocks that are keeping you from seeing that. And that is where the blocks are, right? It's right in the mirror, it's right in our past. But like I say, what I help men with mainly is to go back, identify that, and now we can process ways to let that go so that we can move forward. Because if we're not looking at that and we're not letting that go, it's just going to be an anchor or an obstacle or a block or a wall that
Yeah.
keeps us from actually being who we're meant to be. And the biggest thing that I recognize with men, and the program that I created is called Meant for More, is that men feel like they're meant for more, and they're not living in that way, and they're not embodying that life and living in integrity with the person that they feel like they're meant to be. And that's where the biggest challenges and the biggest struggles are, and we're seeing it on a global scale.
What's the best way for men to find you? How can they find and reach out to you and learn more about the work you're doing?
Yeah, I have a website. It's called The Ripple Effect, www.therippleeffect.life. They can check out all of my stuff on there. I'm very active on Instagram and Facebook, as well as LinkedIn too. So it's Creating the Ripple on Instagram, and then my name, Kevin McNee, on Facebook and LinkedIn. And yeah, the my belief and the whole concept and the theory of the ripple effect is, when we start to do our own work, we start to become better and the most authentic versions of ourselves. And when we do that, everyone that we come in contact with becomes better versions of themselves as well. So hence the ripple effect. So the whole movement and the concept of it is around starting with ourselves. And when we work on ourselves, the world becomes better because of it.
Amazing. Thanks so much for being on here, Kevin. Really appreciate having you as a guest. We'll have to have you on again. There's so much more we could talk about.
Oh man, it's yeah, it's funny. We just get started and it's
Yeah,
like holy shit, it's already an hour. So thanks, Aaron. I appreciate you and appreciate you for having me on here. It's been great to connect with you over the last little while.
likewise. That's good.
Mm.
Thanks. This episode is brought to you by the Amazon best-selling book, Engage, Connect, Grow. 52 lessons to guide individuals, corporate teams to the heart of what truly matters to them. Are you at a point in your life where you're ready to commit to seeing your life challenges differently? Visit Amazon today and obtain your copy of Engage, Connect, Grow.